The fluorescent lights in the police station made everything look harsh and cold. I sat there with my hands folded in my lap, trying to stop them from shaking while my ex-wife Patricia paced back and forth like she owned the place. Her mother, Eleanor, sat across from me, her lips pressed into that familiar thin line of disapproval she'd perfected over the years. Detective Morrison was typing something on his computer, occasionally glancing up at me like I was some kind of criminal. "He's lying about everything," Patricia said for the fourth time, her voice carrying that fake concern she'd mastered during our divorce proceedings. "Check his work records, Detective. He was fired 3 months ago for drinking on the job. He's probably been planning this whole thing to get back at me for leaving him and taking the kids." My 10-year-old son, Marcus, sat in the corner of the room on a plastic chair that was too big for him. He'd been so quiet that everyone seemed to have forgotten he was there. His legs swung back and forth, not quite reaching the floor, and he held his Nintendo Switch tight against his chest, though the screen had been dark for hours. His eyes moved between all the adults in the room, watching, listening, understanding more than anyone gave him credit for. My 5-year-old daughter, Emma, was supposed to be in her hospital bed right now, not missing from Children's Hospital of Denver, where she'd been receiving treatment for leukemia for the past 8 months. "I would never hurt my daughter," I said, my voice cracking despite my efforts to stay strong. "Emma has cancer. She's only 5 years old and she's fighting for her life. Every minute we waste sitting here is a minute she's not getting the treatment she needs to survive." "Or you know exactly where she is," Eleanor interjected, her voice dripping with accusation. "I always told Patricia you were unstable, always said you'd be the death of those children, and now look what's happened to that poor, sick little girl." The words hit me like physical blows. This woman who had made every family gathering a battlefield, who had whispered poison about me to anyone who would listen, who had celebrated when Patricia filed for divorce, was now using my missing cancer patient as ammunition in her war against me. My sweet Emma, with her bald head from chemotherapy treatments and her brave smile that could light up the darkest hospital room. Just this morning, she'd been excited about the new stickers the nurses had given her for being so good during her blood draw, carefully arranging them on her hospital gown in a rainbow pattern, because rainbows mean good luck, Daddy. Detective Morrison looked up from his computer. "Mr. Collins, we need you to understand the severity of this situation. Your 5-year-old daughter, who is undergoing cancer treatment, has been missing from her hospital room for 6 hours. If you know anything about her whereabouts, now is the time to tell us." "I've told you everything," I said, feeling the tears starting to burn behind my eyes. "I went to the parking garage to move my car because the meter was about to expire. It took maybe 5 minutes. Patricia was supposed to be watching her. When I came back, Emma's bed was empty, and Patricia was nowhere to be found either." "Convenient," Patricia muttered. "A parking meter that nobody else noticed. A mysterious disappearance that happened the moment I stepped out to use the bathroom for 2 minutes. You were gone for 20 minutes, I protested. "I timed it because I was worried about leaving Emma alone for so long." 20 minutes? Eleanor scoffed. "More lies. It was 2 minutes, maybe 3. And even if it was longer, that's no excuse for losing a child. You were probably passed out drunk in your car again." The accusation was so absurd I almost laughed, but the situation was too serious. These people who were supposed to care about Emma were more interested in destroying me than finding her. Every second we sat here was another second. My immunocompromised daughter was out there, possibly hurt, definitely frightened, and critically missing the medical care that was keeping her alive. Detective Morrison addressed Patricia. "Mrs. Collins, you filed a custody modification request last week, claiming your ex-husband was drinking again and posed a danger to the children. Can you elaborate on that?" Patricia's eyes lit up with satisfaction. "He's been unstable since I left him 6 months ago. Lost his job at the construction company, behind on his apartment rent, desperate for money. He told me he'd rather see the kids dead than let me take them back to California with me to start our new life." "That's not what I said," I protested. "I said I'd rather die than let you take them away from their medical team during Emma's treatment. She needs consistency, not to be dragged across the country to impress your new boyfriend." But nobody was listening to me anymore. They'd already decided I was guilty of something horrible. The unemployed ex-husband who couldn't keep his life together. The bitter father who'd rather harm his own children than lose a custody battle. The drunk who valued winning more than his daughter's life. Marcus shifted in his chair, and for the first time since we'd arrived at the station, he spoke. His voice was small but clear, cutting through the adult chaos like a bell ringing in silence. "That's not true." Everyone turned to look at him. Patricia's face changed, that flash of annoyance she always got when the kids didn't follow her carefully constructed narrative. "Marcus, sweetheart," she said in her fake, gentle voice, "the adults are talking about important things. Why don't you go back to your game?" But Marcus stood up, still clutching his Nintendo Switch, and looked directly at Detective Morrison. My mom is lying, and I know where Emma really is. The room went completely silent. Patricia's face drained of color. Eleanor's mouth fell open. I felt my world stop spinning. Marcus took a deep breath, squared his small shoulders, and said the words that changed everything. Detective, should I tell you where my mom and Grandma Eleanor really took my sister? That Tuesday morning had started with the kind of hope we hadn't felt in months. Real, tangible hope that maybe, finally, we were turning a corner in Emma's fight against leukemia. I remember standing by her hospital bed in the pediatric oncology ward at Children's Hospital of Denver, watching her sleep peacefully for the first time since her latest round of chemotherapy had started 2 weeks earlier. The morning sun streamed through the windows, painting everything in soft gold light that made even the intimidating medical equipment look less frightening. Emma's bald head was covered by the rainbow beanie her Aunt Sarah had knitted for her, and her favorite stuffed elephant, Mr. Peanuts, was tucked securely under her arm. At 5 years old, she'd already shown more courage than most adults I knew, facing each treatment with a kind of determination that humbled everyone around her. "Daddy, is today the day I get to go home?" she asked when she woke up. Her voice still groggy from sleep, but filled with that eternal optimism that made her everyone's favorite patient on the ward. "Let's see what Dr. Martinez says, Princess. Your white blood cell count has been looking better this week." Marcus was curled up in the fold-out chair beside her bed, still in his pajamas because he'd refused to leave his sister's side for the past 3 days. At 10, he'd become Emma's fierce protector, reading to her when she felt too sick to watch TV, holding her hand during the scary procedures, and making sure she never felt alone in this sterile, frightening world of hospitals and treatments. "Mom's coming today, right?" Marcus asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer might disappoint him. "She said she'd be here by noon." I checked my watch. It was already 11:30 a.m., and Patricia had a history of running late when it suited her purposes. "But even if she's late, we'll have a good day, okay?" Dr. Martinez said if Emma's numbers keep improving, we might be able to talk about going home for longer stretches between treatments. The divorce had been finalized 4 months ago, but the custody battle was far from over. Patricia had been pushing for permission to relocate to Los Angeles with her new boyfriend, Brad, a software engineer who'd promised her a life of luxury and freedom from what she called the burden of being tied to Denver by her ex-husband and sick daughter. The courts had initially denied her request, citing Emma's ongoing medical treatment and the need for stability during her cancer battle. But Patricia was nothing if not persistent. She'd hired a new lawyer, started building a case about my alleged instability and drinking problem, and had been documenting every missed phone call, every time I was 5 minutes late picking up Marcus from school, every moment that could be twisted to support her narrative that I was an unfit father. "Mr. Collins." Dr. Martinez appeared in the doorway, her face wearing that carefully neutral expression that could go either way. After 8 months of treatment, I'd learned to read the subtle signs in her expressions, and today she looked cautiously optimistic. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" she asked. My heart clenched with the familiar mixture of hope and terror that came with every medical update. Dr. Martinez led me into the hallway, away from little ears that didn't need to hear adult worries. "Emma's latest blood work shows significant improvement," she said, and I felt my knees nearly give out with relief. Her white blood cell count is the highest it's been since we started treatment. The blast cells in her bone marrow are down to less than 5%. If this trend continues, we might be looking at reducing the intensity of her chemotherapy protocol within the next month. Does that mean she's in remission? We're not quite there yet, but we're closer than we've been since her diagnosis. Her body is responding beautifully to the treatment. If we can maintain this progress for another 6 weeks, we'll be able to start talking about maintenance therapy instead of intensive treatment. This was the news we'd been praying for since that terrible day 8 months ago, when Emma's pediatrician had felt the swollen lymph nodes in her neck and ordered the blood work that changed our lives forever. Emma could have a more normal childhood. She could play with other kids without constant fear of infection. She might even be able to start school in the fall. "There's something else I need to discuss with you," Dr. Martinez continued, her expression growing more serious. "I received a call yesterday from a Dr. Peterson in Los Angeles. He claimed to be consulting on Emma's case, said he'd been asked to provide a second opinion, but we never authorized any outside consultation, and frankly, his questions were concerning." My blood ran cold. What kind of questions? He wanted copies of Emma's complete medical files, but he was also asking about her prognosis in very specific terms. Questions about life expectancy, about the likelihood of treatment failure, about what would happen if she were moved to a different facility during this critical phase of treatment. "Mr. Collins, I need to be very clear about something. Moving Emma anywhere right now could be dangerous, potentially life-threatening. Any legitimate oncologist would know that." Patricia's been talking about wanting to get a second opinion in California. I told her any second opinion needed to go through you first. This Dr. Peterson. I looked him up after our conversation. He had his license suspended in Colorado 3 years ago for insurance fraud and patient endangerment. He's not someone I would trust with a goldfish, let alone a child fighting leukemia. When I returned to Emma's room, the atmosphere had completely changed. Patricia was already there, and she'd brought reinforcements. She was dressed in her court clothes, the navy blue suit and pearls that signaled she was in battle mode. Eleanor stood beside her like a military advisor, her arms crossed and her face set in that expression of permanent disapproval she'd perfected during our marriage. But there were 2 other people in the room I didn't recognize, a man and woman in medical scrubs, both wearing hospital badges I couldn't read from the doorway. "Daddy!" Emma's face lit up when she saw me, but there was something different in her voice. A note of confusion, maybe even fear. "These doctors want to take me for a special test, but I told them I want to wait for you." "What kind of special test?" I looked at Patricia, who was avoiding my eyes in that way she did when she knew she was overstepping boundaries. "I've arranged for Emma to be evaluated by a specialist downtown," Patricia said, her voice taking on that defensive tone she used when she was caught in a lie. "Dr. Peterson is flying in from Los Angeles specifically to see her. These medical technicians are here to transport her safely." "Without consulting Dr. Martinez? Without consulting me? Emma just had blood work this morning that showed she's improving. She doesn't need any tests." "You don't get to make all the medical decisions just because you've been camping out here, playing the devoted father," Patricia snapped. "Emma needs the best care possible, and that might not be in this hospital with doctors who've been experimenting on her for 8 months without any real progress." Eleanor stepped forward, her notebook already in her hand. I'd learned to hate that notebook over the years. It was where she documented every perceived slight, every piece of ammunition she could use against me in court. "Patricia has every right to seek the best medical care for her daughter," Eleanor said icily. "Unlike some people, she's thinking about Emma's future, not just trying to win points in a custody battle. Emma's future is here, with Dr. Martinez and the medical team that knows her case, in the hospital where she's been responding to treatment." Responding? Patricia's voice rose to that shrill pitch it got when she felt cornered. "She's been sick for 8 months, David. 8 months of watching my baby girl suffer while you parade around here like some kind of hero father, soaking up sympathy from the nurses and doctors. Well, maybe it's time for a real medical opinion from doctors who haven't been filling her with poison and calling it treatment." The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. She was rewriting history, making it sound like Emma's medical team was somehow harming her, like my presence was what was keeping her from getting better. "Mommy, why are you yelling?" Emma's small voice cut through the tension. She was looking back and forth between us, her eyes wide with the kind of fear that no 5-year-old should have to experience, especially not one who was already fighting for her life. Marcus had gone completely silent, sinking deeper into his chair, his Nintendo Switch forgotten as he watched the adults he was supposed to trust tear each other apart over his sister's hospital bed. "I'm sorry, baby," Patricia said, immediately switching to her gentle mother voice. "Mommy and Daddy are just discussing what's best for you. These nice doctors are going to take you to see a very special doctor who might be able to help you get better even faster." "I don't want to go," Emma said quietly, clutching Mr. Peanuts tighter. "I like Dr. Martinez, and Nurse Jenny said she'd teach me to braid friendship bracelets when my fingers stopped being tingly from the medicine." "Well, we might not have a choice," Patricia replied, and I caught the hidden threat in her tone. This wasn't a discussion or a consultation. This was Patricia informing me of a decision she'd already made. "I need to move my car," I said, stepping toward the door. The parking meter was about to expire, and I couldn't afford another ticket on my limited unemployment budget. "I'll watch her," Patricia said, but she was already gathering her purse and coat. "Actually, I need to use the restroom first. Mom, can you stay with Emma for a few minutes while I freshen up?" "I have to make some phone calls about the appointment," Eleanor replied, checking her own phone. "We'll be right back, Emma. You be a good girl and don't get out of bed." Something felt wrong about this. Patricia and Eleanor never left Emma alone, especially not at the same time, especially not with strangers in medical scrubs hovering around her bed. But Emma was drowsy from her morning medications, and Marcus was there, and I really did need to move my car before I got another parking ticket I couldn't afford. "I'll be right back, princess," I told Emma, kissing her forehead and breathing in that sweet smell of hospital shampoo and little girl that I'd memorized during all these months of bedside vigils. "Marcus, you're in charge until I get back. Okay? Okay, Dad. We'll be right here." Those were the last words my son said to me before everything fell apart. The parking garage was busier than usual for a Tuesday afternoon, and it took me longer than expected to find a new spot on a different level. By the time I made it back upstairs to the pediatric ward, 12 minutes had passed. I know because I checked my watch, worried that Patricia would use any delay against me later in court. The first thing I noticed was that Emma's room was too quiet. The second thing I noticed was that Emma's bed was empty, the sheets still warm but my daughter gone. Marcus sat in the same chair, but now he was crying silently, tears streaming down his face as he stared at the empty hospital bed where his sister should have been. Marcus, where's Emma? Where did she go? She's gone, Dad. His voice was so small I could barely hear it. Mom came back with those people in scrubs, and they said Emma needed to go for a special test. They put her in a wheelchair and took her away, even though she was crying and saying she wanted to wait for you. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. What people? Was Dr. Martinez with them? I don't know. They had hospital badges, but I didn't recognize them from any of Emma's other appointments. Mom told me to stay here and wait for you. She said she was going to follow them to make sure Emma was okay, but that was 20 minutes ago and nobody's come back. I ran to the nurse's station, my mind racing through possibilities. None of them good. Where's Emma Collins? I asked the first nurse I saw, Jenny, who'd been taking care of Emma for months and knew our family well. She was taken from room 204 for some kind of test. Jenny looked confused, then alarmed. Emma isn't scheduled for any procedures today. Dr. Martinez specifically canceled all her tests because her blood work was so good this morning. She wanted Emma to have a quiet day to rest and build up her strength. Someone took her, people in scrubs with hospital badges. My ex-wife said they were taking her to see a specialist downtown. Jenny's face went pale. She immediately picked up the phone and called security while I ran back to Emma's room, hoping desperately that this was all some terrible misunderstanding, that I'd find Emma back in her bed complaining about missing her cartoons. But the room was still empty except for Marcus, and now Patricia was nowhere to be found either. Dad? Marcus said quietly, I don't think those people were really from the hospital. What do you mean? Their badges were different from all the other doctors and nurses, and when Mom talked to them in the hallway before you left, I heard her call one of them Brad. Brad. Patricia's boyfriend. The man who wanted to take my ex-wife and children to California to start their new life together, complete with a second opinion from a disgraced doctor that would justify moving Emma across the country during the most critical phase of her treatment. I called Patricia's phone. It went straight to voicemail. I called Eleanor. The same thing. That's when I called 911. And that's when Detective Morrison entered our lives. And that's when Patricia began spinning the most elaborate web of lies she'd ever constructed. The hospital security footage would later show exactly what happened during those 12 minutes I was in the parking garage. Patricia returned to Emma's room with two people in scrubs, not hospital staff, but actors Brad had hired through his cousin's theater company in Los Angeles. They'd created fake hospital badges, fake paperwork, and a fake story about Emma needing an emergency consultation with a specialist downtown. Marcus had been too scared and confused to argue when his mother told him to stay quiet and wait for me to return. Emma, trusting her mother completely, and weakened by months of chemotherapy, had gone willingly when they told her they were taking her to see a special doctor who would help her feel better faster. But I didn't know any of this when Detective Morrison first arrived at the hospital. All I knew was that my daughter was missing, my ex-wife was pointing fingers at me, and time was running out for a 5-year-old cancer patient who needed to be back in her sterile hospital room, receiving the treatment that was literally keeping her alive. The interrogation room at the Denver Police Department smelled like stale coffee, industrial disinfectant, and the kind of despair that seeps into the walls of places where families fall apart. I sat across from Detective Morrison while Patricia paced behind him like a predator circling wounded prey, periodically stopping to whisper things in his ear that made him look at me with increasing suspicion and disgust. Eleanor had positioned herself strategically in the corner with her ever-present notebook, occasionally making dramatic sighs and shaking her head for effect whenever I tried to explain what had really happened. Through the one-way mirror, I could see Marcus in the children's interview room with a social worker, drawing something with intense concentration while tears continued to stream down his face. "Walk me through the timeline again, Mr. Collins," Detective Morrison said, his pen poised over a yellow legal pad that was already filled with notes that I suspected painted me as the primary suspect in my daughter's disappearance. "You left your 5-year-old daughter, who is undergoing cancer treatment, alone in her hospital room to move your car. How long were you gone?" 12 minutes. I checked my watch when I got back because I knew Patricia would try to make it seem longer than it was. I always time these things because she uses every delay against me in court. But 12 minutes is a long time to leave a sick child unattended, Patricia interrupted from behind Detective Morrison's shoulder. Anything could have happened in 12 minutes. A child with a compromised immune system, vulnerable and scared, and he just abandoned her to go deal with a parking meter. She wasn't unattended. You and your mother were supposed to be watching her. You told me you'd be right there. We were in the bathroom for less than 2 minutes, Eleanor said sharply, her voice dripping with the kind of moral superiority she'd perfected over years of judging everyone around her. When we came back, you were gone, and Marcus was alone with Emma. 10 minutes later, when we went to check on them again, Emma had vanished without a trace. Detective Morrison made another note. Mr. Collins, your ex-wife has provided some very concerning information about your recent behavior and mental state. She says you've been drinking heavily since losing your job 3 months ago, making threatening statements about the children, and becoming increasingly unstable and potentially violent. That's not true. I haven't had a drink in 4 months. Ask Dr. Martinez. Ask the nursing staff. Ask anyone who's seen me at that hospital every single day. I've been completely sober because I need to be there for Emma's treatment. Patricia pulled out her phone with the kind of theatrical precision she'd perfected during our divorce proceedings. I have recordings of his voicemails, detective. Listen to this. She pressed play, and my voice filled the room, slurred and angry. You're not taking my kids away from me, Patricia. I'll disappear with them before I let you destroy our family. Emma would be better off dead than living with you and that boyfriend of yours. My blood went cold as ice water flooded my veins. I recognized some of the words, but not in this context, not in this order. That's edited. Those are pieces from different voicemails, taken out of context, and put together to sound like something else entirely. He's been harassing me for weeks, Patricia continued, her voice taking on that victim tone she'd mastered. Calling at all hours, showing up at my apartment uninvited, making threats against me and the children. I have a restraining order hearing scheduled for next week because I'm genuinely afraid for our safety. A restraining order you never told me about, I said, feeling the carefully constructed trap closing around me with each passing minute. Detective Morrison slid a thick document across the table. This is the custody modification request Mrs. Collins filed last week. It alleges that you've been drinking excessively, making threats against your family, and are fundamentally unfit to have any unsupervised visitation with the children. It also requests permission to relocate to California, where Emma can receive better medical treatment from specialists there. I read through the document, my hands shaking with a combination of rage and terror. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, painting me as an unstable alcoholic who cared more about winning a custody battle than his daughter's health and well-being. Every late night I'd spent at the hospital was reframed as abandoning his employment responsibilities. Every time I'd questioned Patricia's parenting decisions was described as harassment and intimidation. Every moment of legitimate concern for my children's welfare was twisted into evidence of my unfitness as a father. Mr. Collins, Detective Morrison continued, his tone growing more accusatory, given your current financial situation and the serious allegations your ex-wife has made, I have to ask you directly. Have you considered that Emma might be worth more to you missing than found? The question hit me like a physical blow to the chest. What the hell are you suggesting? Your ex-wife has informed us that there's a substantial life insurance policy on Emma. $500,000. If something were to happen to her, you'd be the primary beneficiary. That's a lot of money for someone who's unemployed and facing the loss of custody. I couldn't breathe. The room was spinning, and I felt like I was going to vomit. Are you insane? She's my daughter. She's 5 years old and fighting cancer. The only thing I want in this world is for her to get better and come home healthy. Or, Eleanor interjected, her voice dripping with fake sympathy and barely concealed satisfaction. You realized you were going to lose custody anyway, so you decided if you couldn't have her? Nobody could. Maybe you thought if she disappeared or died while in your care, Patricia would be too grief-stricken to fight you for Marcus. Or maybe you sold her, Patricia added coldly. There are sick people who pay good money for children, especially vulnerable children who won't be missed right away. You were alone with her, you're desperate for money, and you've been acting increasingly unstable. I wanted to scream at them, to stop talking and start looking for Emma. Every minute we wasted in this room pointing fingers and spinning theories was another minute my immunocompromised daughter was away from her medical team, away from the sterile environment she needed to survive, potentially suffering in the hands of people who had no idea how to care for a child with leukemia. The insurance policy, I said desperately. That was Patricia's idea. She's the one who wanted to increase Emma's coverage after the diagnosis. She said it was to protect the kid's future, but I never wanted that much money hanging over my daughter's head. Of course you'd try to blame me, Patricia said, her voice rising to that pitch that meant she was about to lose control completely. You're the one who's been obsessed with money since losing your job. You're the one who's been talking about how expensive Emma's treatment is, how it's bankrupting our family, how it would be easier if... If what? Say it, Patricia. Finish that sentence. If she didn't have to suffer anymore, Patricia whispered, and I saw her strategy crystallizing. She was going to claim that I'd killed Emma as some twisted form of mercy, that I couldn't handle watching her suffer through treatment anymore. Through the mirror, I watched Marcus suddenly stop drawing. He stood up from his chair and walked to the door of the interview room, despite the social worker's attempts to keep him seated and distracted. "I need to talk to my dad," he said clearly, his voice carrying through the thin walls. "They're saying things that aren't true, and Emma is going to die if we don't tell the truth right now." The social worker, a kind-looking woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, tried to redirect him back to the table. "Marcus, the adults are having an important conversation about helping to find your sister. Why don't you finish your drawing? It's very good." "It's not just a drawing," Marcus said firmly, his voice stronger than I'd heard it all day. "It's a map of where my sister really is, and they need to see it before it's too late." Detective Morrison looked up from his notes as the door opened, and Marcus walked in, carrying his drawing and wearing an expression I'd never seen before on his 10-year-old face, a mixture of fear, determination, and something that looked remarkably like adult resolve. "Marcus, sweetheart," Patricia said, immediately switching to her mother voice, the one she used when she wanted to manipulate the children. "Go back with Mrs. Rodriguez. Mommy and Daddy are talking to the detective about finding Emma." "You're not talking about finding Emma," Marcus said flatly, his voice steady despite the tears still streaming down his face. "You're lying about Dad, and Emma is going to die while you're lying." The room went completely silent. Patricia's face went white as paper. Eleanor's notebook fell from her hands and clattered to the floor. Detective Morrison leaned forward with sudden, sharp interest. Marcus placed his drawing on the table. It was indeed a map, drawn in careful detail with colored pencils. It showed the hospital, the Denver International Airport, and what looked like an airplane with stick figures inside. There were notes written in a 10-year-old's handwriting. 2:30 p.m. flight, LA, fake doctors, Brad's plan. "My mom and Grandma Eleanor didn't take Emma for tests," Marcus said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "They took her to the airport. She's on a plane to Los Angeles right now with Brad and some fake doctors. They're going to say she died there from getting the wrong treatment, so Mom can collect the insurance money and start a new life." The words hung in the air like a bomb that had just exploded in slow motion. Detective Morrison grabbed his phone and started dialing frantically. Patricia was shaking her head, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "That's impossible," Eleanor sputtered, scrambling to pick up her notebook. "A 10-year-old's imagination. He's confused and scared and making up stories." But Marcus wasn't finished. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder, the one I'd given him for school presentations. "I recorded Mom and Grandma talking in the bathroom before you came back, Dad. They thought I couldn't hear them, but I was right outside the door. I recorded everything." He pressed play, and Patricia's voice filled the room, clear as a bell. "Are you sure Brad's people can handle her medical needs during the flight? She's so weak from the chemo, and if something goes wrong..." "They have a nurse with them," Eleanor's voice replied, cold and calculating. "Once they get to Los Angeles, Dr. Peterson will declare her condition terminal. We'll have documentation showing that the Denver doctors were incompetent, that we moved her to get better care, but it was too late. The insurance company will pay out. David will be blamed for the delay in proper treatment, and will finally be free of this nightmare. What if she actually recovers with this Dr. Peterson? What if the new treatment works?" "She won't recover. Dr. Peterson is being paid very well to ensure that Emma's condition is declared hopeless. One way or another, this ends in California. We just have to make sure David takes the blame for her death." The recording continued for another 2 minutes, laying out the entire plot in cold, clinical detail. How they'd hired fake medical personnel to get Emma out of the hospital without raising suspicion. How they'd arranged for a private jet to fly her to Los Angeles, funded by the advance they'd received from the insurance company for emergency medical transport. How Dr. Peterson, who had been stripped of his license in Colorado for malpractice and insurance fraud, had been paid $50,000 to create a false medical narrative that would justify their actions and ensure Emma's death would be blamed on the Denver medical team's incompetence. Detective Morrison was already on his second phone call, frantically coordinating with airport security, the FBI, and the Los Angeles Police Department. Patricia had collapsed into a chair, her face buried in her hands, her carefully constructed facade finally crumbling. Eleanor was backing toward the door like a cornered animal, her eyes darting between the exits as if she was planning to run. "How long ago did the plane leave?" Detective Morrison asked Marcus, his voice urgent. Marcus checked the digital clock display on his recorder. The recording was made at 12:47 p.m. In the recording, Mom said the plane was scheduled to leave at 2:30. "What time is it now?" Detective Morrison looked at his watch. 2:15. "We might still have time." Detective Morrison's phone rang. He listened intently for 30 seconds, then looked at me with an expression that mixed relief with horror. "Airport security found them at gate B23. The plane was delayed for mechanical issues. They're still on the ground. Emma is safe, and they've arrested 3 adults and 2 people posing as medical personnel. I collapsed forward, my head in my hands, as 6 hours of pure terror finally began to lift from my chest like a weight being removed from my lungs. Is she okay? Does she need to get back to the hospital immediately? EMTs are evaluating her now. She's conscious, alert, and asking for you and Marcus. They're bringing her back to Children's Hospital as we speak. Marcus ran to me, and I pulled him into the tightest hug of his life, feeling his small body shake with relief and exhaustion. Over his shoulder, I watched as Detective Morrison read. Brad had immediately turned state's evidence, providing prosecutors with detailed information about the conspiracy in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony revealed that the entire plan had been Patricia's idea, conceived during one of their early dates when she'd complained about being trapped in Denver by Emma's medical needs and my custody rights. Outside the courthouse, Dr. Martinez was waiting for us with Emma in her wheelchair. Not because she needed it, but because it was hospital policy for all discharged patients. 8 months of treatment had finally paid off in the most incredible way. Emma was not just in remission. Her latest bone marrow biopsy had shown no detectable cancer cells. Her hair was growing back in soft brown curls, and she was wearing a t-shirt that said "Cancer Survivor" in sparkly rainbow letters that she'd picked out herself. "Daddy, can we go home now?" she asked, reaching up to hold my hand with fingers that were finally steady and strong again. "Yes, Princess, we can go home." The home we were going to was different from the small apartment we'd been living in during her treatment. Dr. Martinez had helped me get a job at the hospital as a patient advocate, working specifically with families dealing with pediatric cancer. The work paid well enough that we'd been able to move into a house with a real backyard where Emma could play without worrying about infection risks. Marcus walked beside us, carrying Mr. Peanuts and wearing the special commendation medal the Denver Police Department had given him for his bravery. At 11 years old, he'd grown up a lot in the past year, but he was still fundamentally just a kid who wanted to play video games and protect his little sister. "Dad," he said as we reached our car, "do you think Mom will ever understand what she did wrong?" It was the hardest question he'd asked yet, and I'd learned during our family therapy sessions never to lie to my children about difficult truths. "I think your mom got so focused on what she wanted, money, freedom, a new life, that she forgot what was really important. But that's not your job to worry about, buddy. Your job is to be a kid, and let me worry about keeping you and Emma safe and happy." "I feel sorry for her," Emma said quietly from her wheelchair, her voice carrying that wisdom that seemed impossible in someone so young. She must have been really scared inside to do something so mean to her own children. The capacity for forgiveness in a 5-year-old cancer survivor never stopped amazing me. Even after everything Patricia had put her through, the kidnapping, the terror, the plan to let her die for money, Emma still had compassion for the mother who had tried to kill her. "That's what makes you special, Princess," I told her, lifting her out of the wheelchair and into the car seat she'd finally outgrown during her recovery. "You have the biggest heart in the world." Last month, Emma started first grade at the elementary school near our house. She wears her Cancer Survivor baseball cap on days when she feels self-conscious about her short hair, though it's growing longer every week. She's already made 5 best friends who think her bald patches are totally awesome battle scars and who fight over who gets to sit next to her at lunch. Marcus is in 6th grade now and has decided he wants to be either a police detective or a pediatric oncologist when he grows up. He hasn't quite decided which yet. He carries that digital recorder everywhere, not because he expects to need it again, but because it reminds him that sometimes telling the truth is the most important thing a person can do, even when it's scary. The children's therapist, Dr. Williams, says they're both remarkably well-adjusted, considering what they've been through. Marcus occasionally has nightmares about losing Emma, and Emma sometimes gets anxious when I have to leave her with babysitters. But overall, they're thriving in ways that seemed impossible a year ago. Every night when I tuck them into bed, I'm reminded of how close I came to losing them both. Patricia's plan had been meticulous and might have worked if not for Marcus's incredible courage and Emma's determination to survive. If Marcus hadn't been brave enough to record that conversation, if he hadn't been willing to speak up when the adults were lying, if Emma hadn't been strong enough to survive the stress of being kidnapped during treatment, any number of things could have gone differently. The insurance company conducted their own investigation and discovered that Patricia had taken out additional policies on both children over the past year, bringing Emma's total coverage to $750,000 and Marcus's to $500,000. They denied all claims and were pursuing their own criminal charges for attempted fraud. 3 months ago, Patricia wrote me a letter from prison. It was full of excuses and attempts at justification. She claimed she'd been manipulated by Eleanor and Brad, that she'd never intended for Emma to actually die, that she just wanted to scare me into agreeing to the custody modification. She asked me to bring the children to visit her, said she wanted to apologize to them in person. I threw the letter away without finishing it. My children have been through enough trauma without being exposed to more manipulation from the woman who tried to kill one of them for money. The unexpected gift hidden in the worst experience of our lives is that my children learned the difference between people who truly love them and people who would use them for their own purposes. Marcus found his voice that day in the police station and has never been afraid to speak up for what's right since then. Emma learned that she's stronger than any challenge life can throw at her, stronger than cancer, stronger than her own mother's betrayal, stronger than fear itself. Last week, we went back to Children's Hospital for Emma's quarterly checkup. Dr. Martinez pronounced her officially cured. No more chemotherapy, no more weekly blood draws, no more isolation from other children. Emma celebrated by hugging every nurse on the pediatric ward and giving them each a friendship bracelet she'd learned to make during her recovery. Dr. Martinez, Emma said as we were leaving, do you think other sick kids would like to hear about how I got better? I think they'd love to hear your story, Emma. Would you like to visit them sometimes? Emma nodded eagerly. I want to tell them that even when you're really scared and the medicine makes you feel yucky, you can still get better if you don't give up. And that's exactly what she's been doing. Once a month, Emma and Marcus visit the pediatric oncology ward to spend time with children who are going through what she went through. Emma tells them about the rainbow stickers and friendship bracelets and how Mr. Peanuts helped her feel brave during the scary parts. Marcus shows them his recorder and tells them how important it is to always tell the truth, even when adults are doing wrong things. The nurses say the children they visit always seem brighter and more hopeful after Emma's visits. She has a way of making cancer seem less frightening, of proving that kids can survive things that seem impossible. Dr. Williams, our therapist, says this kind of service work is incredibly healing for trauma survivors, that helping others who are going through similar experiences helps Emma and Marcus process their own trauma in healthy ways. Sometimes I watch my children playing in our backyard and I'm overwhelmed by gratitude. Not just that they survived, but that they emerged from such a terrible experience with their capacity for love and trust intact. They could have become bitter, suspicious, afraid of the world. Instead, they've become advocates for other children, living proof that truth and courage can triumph over even the most elaborate deceptions. If this story resonates with you, please share it with others who might need to hear it. Sometimes the smallest voice in the room can expose the biggest lies. Sometimes a child's courage can save lives. Sometimes a 5-year-old's capacity for forgiveness can teach adults what really matters. The fluorescent lights in that police station seemed harsh and cold 10 months ago, but they illuminated something crucial: the unbreakable bond between siblings who would do anything to protect each other, the power of truth over lies, and the incredible strength that children possess when the adults around them fail them. Marcus learned that day that speaking up for what's right is always worth the risk, even when you're scared. Emma learned that she's strong enough to survive anything, even her own mother's betrayal. And I learned that sometimes the people you trust most are the ones most capable of betraying you, but that the love between a parent and child, real love, not the twisted manipulation Patricia called love, is stronger than any conspiracy. Don't forget to leave a comment about your own experiences with finding courage in impossible situations. Have you ever had to choose between staying quiet and speaking a difficult truth? How do you teach children to trust their instincts when adults are lying to them? Subscribe to this channel for more true stories of resilience, survival, and the triumph of truth over deception. Because in a world where people will use children as pawns in their games, we need more voices speaking up for what's right, no matter how small those voices might seem. The truth has a power all its own, and sometimes it takes a child to remind us just how strong that power can be.